So, what I want to talk about today, and so with these learning lunches, obviously, I don't know that everyone here has done one before, so feel free to eat your lunch while you're kind of going through the learning lunch content. Um, and Amy's going to drop into the chat a quick exercise for you to do. You don't need to do it while we're on the call here. It's something for you to think about afterwards, based on what I'm going to talk about over the course of the next sort of 30 to 40-ish minutes. And I'll get Amy to drop that tool into WhatsApp as well as the chat here so that you've got it. But one of the things that I have found from listening to a few people speak and also reading a certain number of books, one book in particular, which I'll come back to later on, is this power of timing. The timing of when we do what we do actually has a really big impact on the outcome that we get, i.e., how good are we at doing the particular job that we're doing when we do it at different times or at different times of the year or in different ways. So that's what I just want to think about today is how can we think about how we schedule our timing to actually achieve better results more quickly, and do the best that we possibly can, all through the power of timing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to kick things off by explaining this different. So a concept that I've talked about a little bit before. I probably, for most of you that have been on this, on these learning, like new people into the trusted team, you won't have heard me talk about this. For those of you that have been on the trusted team for a while, you'll have heard me talk a little bit about it. But it's this concept of the early bird and the night owl, because what typically happens for 80% of people is that they go through their day in a very similar cycle. So for 80% of people, what happens is that they wake up, they have a peak performance window that happens sort of throughout the morning. And then after lunch, they tend to go into a bit of a trough. And then they have what they call the rebound phase, which is kind of sort of like 5, 6 o'clock-ish. And we perform at our very best in that peak window, but we do different tasks better in the sort of rebound stage. And the trough is when we perform kind of way worse. And if we think about this and I say this applies to 80% of people, because what we think this applies to is those people that would describe themselves as an early bird. So the people that tend to be good at getting up in the morning and rising, not like super early necessarily, but early birds. And there's three types of profile in this category. So we've got the early birds, we've got the night owls, and then we've got the third birds, which are the sort of people in between. So 20% are properly early birds, 20% are properly night owls, and then the rest are the third birds. And so what the people that follow that profile are the early birds and the third birds. The only people that don't follow that profile are the night owls, and the night owls actually reverse the model. So what the night owls actually have their rebound phase in the morning, and then they have their trough like the early birds did, but then they have their peak performance in the evening, which is why so many, if you're a night owl or you speak to night owls, they're like, yeah, I absolutely love working at like 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. I can just smash it out the park at that time. Where the early birds are sitting there going, God, all I can face doing at that point is kind of binge watching Netflix because I'm totally drained. So we need to think about what we can do in these different times to get the greatest performance out of ourselves. And there's different types of tasks that we do better in our peak zone than we do in our rebound zone. So our peak zone tends to be more analytical, more kind of engagement orientated work. but our rebound stage tends to be more focused on creative work. And so therefore, when I sort of started uncovering this, what I realized was that for example, when I started kind of embracing this approach, I was running efficient portfolio. And what I realized was my most important thing, my most kind of analytical part of my day, the time where I had to be on my game the best and most engaging with other people was when I was meeting clients. And I realized that I was way better at meeting clients in the morning, i.e., in that peak zone. So I am an early bird. So if we go back to this one, in this peak zone here, I was way better at dealing with clients. If I booked them in straight after lunch, it was a car crash. And at 5 o'clock, it was kind of okay, but it wasn't great. So what I ended up doing was saying, right, I only want my client meetings to be in this peak window. So I only want client meetings in the morning. Now, of course, occasionally you have to go outside of that window because just can't do that. But typically, what you're doing is you're trying to give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. So I worked out that my most important tasks were needed to go into that peak zone. However, because the creativity piece was better actually in the rebound stage, I often found that if I wanted to go and plan a keynote talk or build out some coaching content or something like that, that would actually be better as an afternoon activity after I'd been through the trough. So think about that as to whether you think you're a night owl or an early bird or a third bird. And like I said, only really 20%, i.e., the absolute night owls, flip the model. Everyone else has their peak period in the morning. Everyone has the trough after lunch, and then like 80% of people have their rebound phase in the afternoon. Now, we can apply this to so many different things in our life. So, for example, the Fitbit did some research, and they really what they found was there was there was people that exercised at 6 a.m. and people that exercised at 6 p.m. Really, yes, there was people that exercised all over the top, all over the place, but those were the two massive spikes. But what was most interesting was they found that the people that exercised at 6 a.m. exercised twice as often as the people that exercise at 6 p.m. Now, we all inherently know this, or certainly, unless you're a night owl, you inherently know this. So if I get up in the morning and the first thing I'm doing is going out and doing my exercise, it almost never doesn't happen. I almost always will get up and do my exercise because nothing gets in the way. Whereas we know that at 6 p.m. we go, oh, there's that extra email, or I've had that rubbish conversation with a client, or something, or I'm just exhausted and I can't muster up the motivation to do the thing that I said I would do. But if we know that that's the case, and we know that exercise is one of the most important things, is if we don't look after ourselves, we can forget looking after our business long term. So if we know that's the most important thing, we should do that first and build ourselves to succeed better. So exercising first thing in the morning is definitely the best way to do it. You'll exercise way more often, but also exercising first thing actually helps you sleep, which is an important part of us being on our best game, something I'll come back to in a minute. Whereas actually exercising in the evening can be a detriment to your sleep. So we can think about how we time certain things to make the best of it. And we kind of underestimate how big an impact this has. So a Danish school did a series of exams or had a situation where the same exam was being taken by all of the students, but some were taking it in the morning and some were taking it in the afternoon. And it was just potluck as to who got allocated which slot. So do you think, based on what I've just said, that taking an exam in the afternoon would make a bit of a difference to taking it in the morning? Well, hopefully, if you've been paying attention, yes, absolutely, you're expecting that. But by how much? Well, taking the exam, being kind of unlucky and getting the exam allocated to you in the afternoon was the equivalent loss of performance to missing a week off school through sickness. Missing a week of lessons was the impact that you taking your exam in the afternoon had versus taking it in the morning. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. Um, and these daily fluctuations are like, it can be really quite extreme. So Russell Foster, a neuroscientist, did some research at Oxford University, and he found that the performance change between the daily high point and the daily low point can be the equivalent of having the legal limit of alcohol in your bloodstream. So imagine going into your most important meeting and going, I think I'll have a couple of pints before I do that. You just wouldn't do it, would you? And you know, when you have had those days where you're kind of, oh, I've had a boozy lunch and now I'm expected to actually do some work. Um, you're just never, ever going to be anything close to your game. And yet, by putting in a really important meeting in at, say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're doing exactly the same as you would be versus putting it in at 9 o'clock. And like I said, it actually, the types of work that we can do at different times of the day actually changes quite dramatically. So for most of us, that if we think about that 80% of us with the peak in the morning, then the trough, and then the rebound, most of us will excel at analytical work, which requires sharpness, vigilance, and focus. And then later on in the day, during the recovery phase, most of us do better on insight work that requires less inhibition and resolve. So again, that creativity stuff comes out later on, analytical stuff, or kind of being really sharp and thinking about, if you're with a client and you need to be like really on it, that's going to have a huge impact on your, you're going to be far better at doing that in your peak window, whenever that is. So if we think about if we go back to sort of sleep patterns, and I'm going to come back to how important sleep is in this approach. But if we're going to think about timing, we've got to start the day really well. And there's a few simple things if you read books, again, I'll come back to later on, that you can do to start your day really, really brilliantly right from the off. The first thing to do is to drink a glass of water as soon as you wake up. Don't hit the caffeine at this stage. Don't have coffee immediately after you wake up. Defer that till kind of a little bit later on, but have a glass of water as soon as you wake up, and then soak up as much morning sun as you can as early as possible. Now, since I had my eyes lasered, I'm quite sensitive to sunlight. So I have a tendency to put sunglasses on at all times when there's a vague kind of, my kids take the piss out of me for wearing sunglasses when it's only vaguely sunny. But actually, I've learned more recently that that run in the morning or that bike ride in the morning, well, not so much the bike ride because you'll get flies in your eyes, but that run in the morning, I don't have the sunnies on, because actually you can get as much vitamin D as possible, and letting your eyes soak up the morning sun is actually really powerful. And then think about, well, when should your day start? I recently went into Calendly and told it, I don't want meetings before 10 o'clock. I'm actually quite good at performing at meetings at 9 o'clock, but it just makes my fitness and all the other stuff I do first thing in the morning a bit more of a rush. So, like, when should my day start? And I know Stephen Bartlett talks about how he learned from Deborah Meaden that he doesn't start his day until 11 o'clock, because that way he can do all the things that he perceives as to be the most important things before his day starts. But then he is a night owl, so 11 o'clock is probably a little bit later than I would choose. But again, just coming back to the impact of this stuff, one of the studies that I remember reading about shows that judges are more likely to issue a favorable ruling, i.e. granting a prisoner parole or allowing him to kind of remove an ankle monitor or whatever it is. They're much more likely to give that favorable ruling in the morning than in the afternoon. So what can we learn from this? Well, we can learn from this, if you're ever attending a court hearing and you are the defendant, you might want to make sure you get a morning appointment rather than an afternoon appointment. But think about it in terms of how you're dealing with anyone. Yes, it might be just you being on your A game, but actually, if you want the other person to be on their A game, unless you know that they're a night owl, you might want to be interacting with them in their peak window as opposed to when they're in their trough. And one of the things, again, that comes out of this kind of timing principle is that restorative breaks are really powerful. So I've got more into the habit of having a nap. I don't think having a nap every day is necessarily the right approach. And the more I've read, the more I think if you're needing to nap every day, you're probably not getting enough sleep. But I think on certain days, napping is really powerful. And the idea is that 20 minutes seems to be the optimum for having a nap. Um, and one of the other things you can, with these restorative breaks is they don't actually, it's not just about napping. It's also about having kind of bursts of really high focused work and then having a short break. So high performers in some research that I found work for about 52 minutes and then break for about 17 minutes. So really focused work and then have a break. And there's some principles around having restorative breaks that are really powerful. So one is moving beats stationary. So if you're going to have a break, much better if you can go outside for a bit of a walk rather than sit down and chill out. Social beats solo. So again, actually going and having a chat to one of your colleagues or someone in a cafe is much better than sitting there and being on your own. Outside beats inside. Again, fresh air, take some short walks. That is going to replenish you much better. And fully detached beats semi-detached. So fully detached from your technology, having a restorative break that doesn't involve looking at your phone is way better for you than having a bit of time out, but just staring at Instagram or whatever. And like I said, I think having naps is really powerful on at certain times, and usually between 10 and 20 minutes. I actually sometimes when I on like quite often on a Monday actually, because I've done like a sociable weekend, a heavy training weekend, and then on a Monday I feel like a nap is a good thing for me. So I would typically set up a meditation an alarm for 20 minutes and I'll sit there and do a 10-minute meditation. If I fall asleep within that meditation, that's fine. I'll wake up after 20 minutes. If I don't fall asleep, then I've had a meditation and I win either way. But it also means that I'm not stressed about whether I'm falling asleep quickly because I'm getting the benefit from a meditation. And I use the Calm app for that nowadays. But one of the principles you might want to think about is, particularly if you spend most of your time looking at a screen, is the 20-20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes, look at something that's 20 feet away for 20 seconds. I'm going to do that as we speak, looking over the screen here at a lovely, beautiful thatched building in Rutland. But every 20 minutes, look at something that's 20 feet away, at least 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds. So thinking more about this timings thing then, the beginning of anything has far greater significance than we typically understand. So it's one of the reasons why having, like doing a goal setting at the start of the year, having a kickoff day for your business to kind of go through those goals and get everybody motivated. And the same with each quarter, having a kind of starting right, then starting again, and also starting together. So starting in unison. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about now is the power of timings. And there are 4 situations in particular when you should definitely go first. So if you're on a ballot, so like, for example, you're trying, like a ballot for the Oscars or prom queen or something like that, then being listed first gives you an edge. And also, if you're not the default choice, so for example, if you're pitching against a firm that would already have the account, going first can really help you get a fresh look from the decision makers. If there are relatively few people that are competing, so let's say 5 or less, then going first can help you take advantage of with what's called the primacy effect, which is the tendency of people have to remember the first thing in a series better than those that come later on. And then finally, if you're interviewing for a job and you're up against several strong candidates, you might well gain that primacy edge from being first. So think about where you should be in the sequence. And of course, if you're the person that's doing the interviewing, you might think about this as well, am I giving this person a higher score because they're the first person that I've seen in this sequence of interviews? There are also four situations when you should definitely not go first. So if you are the default choice, don't go first. If there are many competitors, i.e. there's a lot of people pitching for the same thing, then going later can actually give you an advantage, and going last can confer a huge advantage actually. If you're operating in an uncertain environment, not being first can work to your benefit. And if the competition is meager, i.e., and going towards the end can give you an edge by highlighting your differences. So you can apply this to lots of different things in business, but think about when you've got the opportunity, whether you're pitching, whether you're interviewing, think about where you should be in that sequence based on that advice. The midpoint of any time period is also really powerful. So in a football game, one study found that teams that were behind by just one goal at half time were more likely to win. So if you're 1-0 down or 2-1 down at half time, you're actually more likely to win than if you're 1-0 up or 2-1 up, which sounds ridiculous, but apparently it's true. Home teams with a goal deficit at half time won more than 58% of the time. So think about, and there's a reason for that. It's because there's that motivation boost of being behind, but only being a little bit behind. So we can use that in certainly in business. So we might think about the goals halfway through the year and think, right, okay, this is the 6-month point. Are we a bit behind? Right, what do we need to do? We want to make sure that we're only a bit behind, which is one of the reasons why actually 6-month point. So when you're doing your second quarterly leadership meeting of the year, that's the one time to go back and revisit those annual goals and go, are they still right? Do we still buy into them? If you're like 10-0 down because you're so far behind the curve, and you've got no chance of hitting that 1-year goal based on what you've learned in the first 6 months, there's no point in sticking to that 1-year goal, because if nobody's going to get motivated by something that's so ridiculously unachievable. So that's why reevaluating those 6-monthly goals at the second leadership meeting of the year is actually a good thing, because you want to get buy-in. You still want to make it a challenge. So beware of midpoints in any timing, but like in goal setting, there's a really obvious one there. And use them to sort of wake you up rather than roll over. So you think, look, right, let's kind of set this challenge. We can do this. We can, yes, it's going to be difficult, but we absolutely can. And so any opportunity where you can imagine that you're behind to spark motivation at the turning point, but behind by only a little, then that is really powerful in motivating you. And like I said, I think using this approach in your sort of second leadership meeting is really, really brilliant. And then the final thing to think about in timing is the power of the end. So I think I mentioned in the gifting approach how we used to gift people a special present in their 49th year and their 39th year instead of when they turned 50 or 39. And the reason we did this is because someone who's 49 is about 3 times more likely to run a marathon than somebody that's just a year older. And something like 90% of first-time marathoners do it in the last year of a decade. So their 29th, their 39th, their 49th year. It's actually a really powerful opportunity. People go, well, I'm going to do this in my 40s, and it's my 49th year. Right, I've got to do it now. So we can kind of see that as a really powerful opportunity. And certainly in the psychology of sport, we see this because, like, if we use in the endurance mindset, I talked about how the third length is the hardest, which is why having that review at the halfway point is really powerful. But the fourth length, i.e. the last length, is actually always easy, because Yes, you're tired, but you can see the finish line. You can see, and you can motivate yourself to push through the pain to get there. Um, so we when we think about the end of events, we assign kind of a huge amount of a great amount of weight to that last moment, that sort of last at that end. Um, we downplay how long an episode lasts and magnify what happens at the end. If you read Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow, and this is called the duration neglect, and it's really powerfully seen in the medical treatment world. So there was a whole load of people that were exposed to a really, I can't actually remember the treatment, but it was a really not a very nice let's medical treatment, and it was painful, and it lasted for an hour. And then they had a separate group that went through exactly the same treatment, had exactly the same 1 hour of pain, but added on, they got 10 minutes of mild pain. So you've got one group that have had an hour of pain, and you've got one group who've had an hour of pain plus 10 minutes of mild pain. Who do you think rated the whole experience worse? The people who had an hour and 10 minutes, or the people who had an hour? Yes, you guessed it. It's the people that had an hour worth of pain rated it worse, because what the last 10 minutes, we kind of, because we put so much power on this end, the end of the experience, we actually forget how painful what it was going on before that, or how long it took. So we can think about this in business in terms of, how can we make sure that the end of the journey that the client has is like really magical, so they remember that little bit at the end, even if not everything went perfectly according to plan on that journey. The final principle around timing is to think about how we can do stuff in unison with others. Being in synchronization with other people is incredibly powerful. It makes us feel good. It helps it helps people connect. It really is way more powerful than we appreciate. It's why doing a online yoga class on your own in your living room is nothing like as powerful as being in a yoga studio with other people. It's why singing in a choir is so much more powerful. It's why cycling or running with mates or swimming with mates is much easier. The time flies quicker. The effort feels a fraction of what it would have done. You cycle further, longer, faster. You climb hills better because you're doing it in synchronization with other people. And this also applies in business. The more we can bring people together and create tribes and have people doing what we do for them in synchronicity and as a tribe, the more powerful that can be. It also applies to our fitness and our exercise. So if you want to be more dedicated to your sport, I remember chatting to Shane Benzie about this, and uh, he talked about how the Kenyan runners and the Ethiopian runners all run together, and they actually really frown upon people training on their own, because they feel like that person is being selfish by only training without on their own, as opposed to with the group. But it's very much about, he shows this brilliant video of how you've got like the first 5 Kenyans are running in total synchronicity. And then the 6th and 7th one are kind of out of sync, and they don't really run in the same way, and they're hanging on the back, and they look like they're completely different runners. And yet they're the most recent to the group. And gradually what will happen is they will learn to run in sync with the others. They'll become amazing runners, and eventually they'll probably be the ones that are at the front of that group. So it of course gives you accountability as well, but bringing this together is bringing people together to do things together is really powerful. We saw it when we did client review workshops. We saw it when we brought people together in golf days. It just the more you can bring people together to do things together, the more powerful a tribe you will build. So if you want to find out more about these topics, probably the best books you can read really, although the best book you can read on this is When by Dan Pink. He talks about the science of timing and like there's just so much brilliant wisdom within that book. I love that book. It is fantastic. But if you want to think about how you can focus better and particularly use things like time blocking, then Indistractable by Nir Eyal is a very good book. And if you want to think about specifically around why we sleep, how you can use sleep better, how important sleep is, and just to be clear, I mean, I probably haven't reiterated this recently, and if you want to go into the sleep topic in more detail, then there is a why we sleep learning lunch. I'll probably redo that. It's been quite a long time since we did that, so I'll probably revamp that and do that again at some point. Um, but if you're not convinced that having your 8 hours or 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep every night is really important, then sleep. We should have evolved. If sleep wasn't important, we would have evolved sleep away. Historically, being exposed, being highly vulnerable to our competitors, not being able to mate or not being able to get food for a huge window of each day was a really, really bad evolutionary design if it doesn't have a phenomenally important impact on our life. Pretty much every species on the planet has some form of sleep or other. So it is really vital. And I think we're only in recent years are we realizing quite how important sleep is to performance, whether that be your work performance, your fitness performance, your ability to fight disease, all of that stuff. It's just like it's the biggest game changer. If you can get up to getting really good quality 8 hours of sleep every night, it makes a huge difference on your performance.